Okay, thank you for bearing with me on this, and thank you for writing your response. Now, at this point, you've seen some examples of embryonic stem cell research. You learned what Lauren could benefit from this as a patient with juvenile diabetes, and seen some of the differences between embryonic stem cell sources. Again, I realize this is not part of your notes, but I do want you to jot down some ideas because at that point, the big discussion every day that summer of 2001 was what was President Bush going to do regarding stem cell research? Was he going to provide full funding? Was he going to provide partial funding? Was he going to say, no way, we can't do any sort of research at all on embryonic stem cells? And you bet that that made a big difference, not only to the patients that were seeking treatments eventually from embryonic stem cell research, but also to the scientists that wanted to be doing this research too. So people like Jamie Thompson at UW-Madison, who had developed this process to start the research, now waiting to see if there'd be federal money available. Money from taxes, from you, from me, to be able to pay for this research. Now, federal funding is not the only funding that's available. There's still private money and there's still state level funding and everything, but federal funds are a huge source of money for scientific research. Most scientists don't pay for the funding of their research out of pocket. No scientist really does. And so they're looking for money from outside sources. Private foundations can provide money, and so can the federal governments, like the National Institutes of Health, provide a huge amount of money every year for scientific research to happen, unless there's a ban on that type of research. So in 2001, federal funding was limited to stem cells already made from leftover blastocysts. No new human embryonic stem cells could be produced. Essentially, what President Bush said was, look, we already have these stem cells that were made from these leftover blastocysts. I don't want you making any more, okay? But we can allow funding for those stem cells that had already been produced. I think there were about 19 of them or so. Well, the possibilities of working with only 19 meant that there's a limitation in the genetics that's there within those 19. It meant that at some point those 19 weren't going to work because you could only keep them frozen and keep reproducing them over and over again a certain number of times. This was kind of limiting, but at least a step in a certain direction. He wasn't saying there's no way you can do research at all, but since these leftover blastocyst embryonic stem cells are already here, let's work with those. Then President Obama comes in, and President Obama revises things a bit. The policy that exists from President Obama to today, from 2009, says that federal funds can be used to create new stem cells. So you can create more, but federal funding is prohibited for creation of a human embryo for research purposes. In other words, you can create more from leftover blastocysts because, again, we aren't going to do anything with them anyway. But creation of human embryos through somatic cell nuclear transfer, this therapeutic cloning, is still banned. The idea being that we don't create human embryos, human blastocysts, just to destroy them and do research, regardless of what the benefits potentially might be. Well, you can imagine that this created a situation for scientists yet too that, okay, great, but now we don't have a way of being able to treat individual patients necessarily with this treatment because we don't have that perfect genetic match. And even then, remember, the federal law can state one thing, but other states can start to go above and beyond that. And you don't need to keep track of this list. There's no way I would ever quiz you on this. But I just want to show you that there are states that currently have laws on the books that ban reproductive and therapeutic cloning, just outright stating it. Other states ban reproductive cloning in particular. Other states ban the use of public money for reproductive and or therapeutic cloning. In other words, even though the federal government might allow federal money to be used for it, they might completely ban the use of money at all within that state for doing this type of research. And then states that specifically allow therapeutic cloning, including California that has their own big stem cell research centers that pours hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, millions of dollars into doing money or research using only state tax dollars. Well, again, this is limiting in some way because, again, you can do the research on these leftover embryo blastocysts, but they're not going to be a perfect match. They're going to give you some ideas about how human development works, and you can do some testing, but what sort of treatments are you really going to get from these that are a perfect match for an individual? And so researchers came along and they developed in 2007 a completely new way of creating stem cells that I think gets completely around this ethical issue. And the process that they developed, the type of stem cells that they developed, are called induced pluripotent stem cells. Induced, like inducing someone to have labor. Inducing means to push something along that was maybe not going to happen, but we're going to cause it to happen artificially. And remember, pluripotent describes these stem cells that have the potential to become everything except for the blastocyst. And so induced pluripotent stem cells, we're going to create something that wasn't embryonic stem cells to begin with, but now has the same potential as those cells. What does that mean? What they do is they take a somatic cell, an already differentiated cell like a skin cell, a cell that was already going to become more skin cells over and over and over again, but they take 4 genes and they add them into these skin cells. Now these 4 genes were very active back in the blastocyst stage, and so they reactivate them long after that stage. Cells that were already committed to be skin cells, but by adding these 4 genes back, or by reactivating them, these cells de-differentiate. And what that means is that they forget that they've decided to be skin cells or some other type of somatic cell, and they revert back to the embryonic stem cell stage. Pretty cool. I mean, the fact that you can tell a cell to forget what type it is and get it to go back to that embryonic stem cell stage, and then tell it to become something else. Tell a skin cell to ultimately become a heart cell or a nerve cell or something like that. What that means is that if we take a skin cell from you, now we have cells that are a perfect match for you, and we didn't have to create a blastocyst to do it. And if there's no blastocyst that's produced, there's also no blastocyst that's destroyed. And this process was developed by 2 researchers, one out in Japan, Dr. Shimna Yamanaka, and then also another one at UW by the name of Dr. Jamie Thompson. Again, he's going to win the Nobel Prize here someday for the work that he's done on stem cells. But a completely new, novel way of creating stem cells without producing a blastocyst. And the vast majority of embryonic stem cell research that's taking place today is being done with iPS cells. Well, I'm going to have you watch another video here. It's linked again through the calendar. Thank you again for bearing with me. If you get through all of this today, fantastic. If you don't, that's totally fine, and we'll catch up together when I am able to come back.